Good evening. This is Mae Brussell. My program is titled World Watchers, and this is broadcast number 695, April the 1st, 1985. Last week I was talking about these organizations that are covered as humanitarian or charitable or medical relief, helping the people who are victims of the weapons that we sell in the countries where we profit from the sale of these weapons and the wars, and then we send in millions of dollars to supply the relief after people are injured or widowed or orphaned. And I was trying to make a connection of the organizations that we call charitable to the Defense Department and also to other areas that are causing the complications and problems that are taking place. And just to review for 1 second before we go on, because I want some of this to be very clear in your minds, or as clear as possible for people who missed the program last week. A continuation here. I described a meeting the past 2 weeks in September of 1984 in San Diego of the World Anti-Communist League, set up in 1966 in Taiwan by the son of Chiang Kai-shek and by Reverend Moon in South Korea, and with money from the intelligence community aided by Richard Vagary of the far right, the fundraiser for Young Americans for Freedom, and for Jesse Helms and many of the other groups linked directly back to the World Anti-Communist League. And at that meeting in 1984, the president of World Anti-Communist League became Major General John Singlaub. Attending the meetings regularly and part of the organization and structure are Nazis from World War II, heads of death squads in Central South America or even in Asia, wherever death squads are used, assassination teams, military activists that want military solutions, people whose stated goal is to overthrow the Russian government and the Chinese government, which naturally involves their techniques in warfare that we would be included with or be asked to die for or pay for, these 98 countries. And after that meeting in September of 84, John Singlaub went on to the Defense Department to meet with General Aderholt, formerly of the CIA, and working with Singlaub under him with the Special Operations Group in the Phoenix program in Southeast Asia, and General Lansdale, also part of the Phoenix operation and the counterintelligence group from Southeast Asia. Singlaub, Aderholt, and Lansdale meeting with the Defense Department, planning operations of counterintelligence to escalate the wars in Central America, to control them for American arms and for American profits and use. The people or native population, except for a handful, are not considered. That it broadly narrows down to a handful of people and American corporations that profit from all of the debts that we get into for funding this kind of thing, much less the guilt or the blood or the karma of how many we've allowed to be killed. And after the December meeting, there was an article in the Washington Post about the links of the Vatican and the Knights of Malta, the literal military branch, the sovereign military order of Malta, and the agents of that group, such as J. Peter Grace and Prescott Bush and Zbigniew Brzezinski and William Simon, and their role in delivering supplies, 14 million in 2 years, down to Central America, in sharing warehouses with General Aderholt of the Central Intelligence Agency and the El Salvador military dictatorship. So bringing in the defense, the Vatican, and also the links of Reverend Moon and Soldier of Fortune. And Soldier of Fortune, of course, is opened up another branch for training military in Colorado, a adjunct or part of the Defense Department. If our Pentagon isn't supposed to be doing this work, the Soldiers of Fortune train them. So that these various elements that began after World War II, that started over with the Chinese, the Asian League, and the anti-communist group in Taiwan, developed in South Korea, and then moved into the United States area, funded by the United States, but having the president of the organization with these various fascist elements around the world in the United States, working with the Defense Department. I keep repeating this because it is very important to the way wars will be fought in the future as they're being fought now without our decision, and even this handful of people with so much power can decide if and when the bomb goes off. There won't be a Congress to vote or declare war. They will have disinformation and material for you to be forced to go to war, and the decisions will be out of our hands just as they are now. Because once you relinquish those powers, as I cited several weeks ago, when William Donovan took over the organizations that became the OSS and into the CIA, and you give them the right to assassinate and to sabotage, and it becomes legal under a presidential edict, then you can't unturn that, and it doesn't limit how many you can assassinate or sabotage, and so it continues. Now, going back to the research done by some other people other than myself, but melding into what I have, and very much understanding their work and adding to what I knew, always liking and appreciating to learn from other people. There are some who have studied the magazines, the Gung Ho Eagles, the Soldier of Fortune, the Survivalist magazine, the New Breed, and if you haven't read those, I'll be doing a lot of that for you probably next week if I don't have time, but maybe some this week. If you don't have those magazines, I suggest you go on the stand and start buying them now. I think I've mentioned it before. If you want to see America in 1986 or 87, you better put down Women's Day or Sports Illustrated or Time or Newsweek or Life or whatever you read and start getting those magazines, because that is the face of America, and they work with the intelligence community, they work with the Defense Department and the Vatican, and that is going to be America. As much as you hide your head, you better face it and see what is ahead, because hiding it isn't going to make it any sweeter. Now, their study is centered on John Singlaub, and these particular people wrote that General John Singlaub exemplifies the military intelligence link which oversees and coordinates today's paramilitary groupings. And that, again, gets in the timely news of the United States. And people on the board of Western Goals, such as Mr. Wigner, he was a member of the BND and has contacts to Vienna and Germany that go right back to the roots of these problems in the first place. Mr. Stenholz on the board of Western Goals was a former member of the Luftwaffe of Hitler's Air Corps and works with the Pew family and foundation, extremely right-wing before the war, and he's nestled into their operation. And Admiral Moore and George Patton III, I'll do a list of Western Goals members in a little while, but Singlaub works with them on the board and also is linked to the police departments, as I say, by these computers with their international links. And he is the exemplification of the military intelligence group working at all different levels. Singlaub, according to this report, uses military intelligence network links that cover overseas and coordinates the paramilitary group. He is the key figure linking the four most important organizations that come together that I cited several times for you, and we'll do more on them individually. These are the elements of today's extremist right, and from them branch the other areas, but they all connect together in some way with these various elements. One are the mercenary magazines, the paramilitary network. They advertise Nazi tapes, Nazi helmets and clothing, and hate cassettes and films and books on battle and the mistakes of World War II and the victories of now and how to apply it. And they're filled with pictures of killing and stabbing and dead people, and those are the mercenary magazines. The second is the World Anti-Communist League that I've exposed or talked about at length and can do more. The American Security Council and their allied coalition through Peace Through Strength that I mentioned, and Western Goals used by the former John Birch head, Larry McDonald, and their links to the intelligence network in Germany and Vienna, and the implications of what it means for filling the hands of John Singlaub and the continuation of Senator Joseph McCarthy people with material that the guerrillas can use if they want to go door to door. If there is a takeover or violence in this country, the people's homes would be identified, and you would know exactly where to strike if you wanted to take people who you thought would be a resistance to fascism in this country. When I worked for the Census Department 4 or 5 years ago, I learned that every single person is identifiable to a block and a house. And when the final reports come in, you can name any single person and find the block and house they live on. And if they have a P.O. box, general delivery, you can find the city, and eventually you can find their location. They use the Department of Motor Vehicle. So the potential here is tremendous, considering the people who are running the various organizations and the direct link to the military. Admiral Moore is on the board of Western Goals. As I say, I'll run down their names later. But combined with these are the extreme elements, and these organizations are always maintaining ties to the fascists, the neo-Nazis, and the death squads. The growing variety of the paramilitary right, they claim, these researchers, is widely distributed through the magazines, and they have large circulation and publication. They're not just small operations. They get into the hands of a lot of people. And they listed 7 points about these magazines that are pertinent to them. Number 1, they're filled with color and photo sheets of mutilated bodies. 2, they advertise the Waffen SS uniforms and the clothes and the rings and human skulls that you can buy from them. Incidentally, there is a book, a 3-part book on Anthony Sutton, who wrote On Wall Street and the Rise of Hitler, who has a book on the secret society in Yale that George Bush is a member of, and William Buckley, the Skull and Crossbones, where they are allegedly supposed to, in the initiation, dig up a grave of a famous person and bring in the skull before they can become a member of the organization. And this is the most exclusive organization, one of the most exclusive cult-type groups in the United States. I haven't sent for his book, but I understand it includes the information about the kinds of skulls that our high officials partake in order to work their way up to the highest echelons of the government and intelligence, and part of the Vatican network, digging up skulls for initiation process. That's, as I say, I have to send for the book, but people who know about the Skull and Crossbones Society at Yale have talked about this and say, yes, it does exist, and this is a requirement of joining it. So maybe these mercenaries and the groups from Soldier of Fortune and Gung Ho aren't so bad as our leaders in Washington, if in fact these are things that they do as part of their college training. The third point is they advertise axes, daggers, silencers, high-powered, rapid-firing weapons to be used for mass combat actions, and of course the silencers are to be used for murder. They maintain notices of where the mercenaries are to go to be the battle. They're for hire, and you can't separate whether the government, the Pentagon, is paying the money, and because we can't send soldiers there, we can't send an army there, but they can go for hire, and who is really paying them? Mr. Brown, a Soldier of Fortune, I'm sure isn't putting up the money, and John Singlau, Major John Singlau, with his trips to the intelligence community and the Defense Department, can pick up the money. There is no way to know, because these organizations are not separated from where the money tree shakes, and their intent and purposes is stated that we will do the things that Congress doesn't want us to do and the President says we can bypass them. The thing that they mention in these magazines is the paramilitary training camps and the use of heavy weapons. And the articles exalt the lives and subcultures of mercenaries as being exciting on how to kill and how to slice, and the adrenaline and how many they picked up, and illustrations of gruesome and sadistic parts of the Vietnam War and the current fighting in Central America. I have a big collection of these magazines, and I can vouch for that. They meet annually or regularly to sell shirts and clothing and weapons and discuss their feats, and they carry out their own mercenary, covert, or unconventional operations with the approval of the U.S. administration. A perfect example was the group of paramilitary working at that Crystal River arrest. It was in March, just before Ronald Reagan was shot, March of '81, and they were around some very sensitive areas, and they were picked up and never charged, and had weapons for assassination. And then later this group linked down to the intended invasion of Dominica, and linked to the Ku Klux Klan and the Nazis and the Grand Dragon of the Klan, and even to John Connolly, a member of Permindex. And so they have a lot of places in the United States where they can practice and train, and if they're found with these weapons and silencers and so forth, they're just released because they are a branch of the United States government. The Special Forces in North Carolina is a legal branch of the government, and then these people are trained by members of the Special Forces, or they're out of the Special Forces. They left Vietnam or Korea or Special Forces or Nazi Germany to then work as, in quotes, mercenaries. And they carry out, as I say, their private wars and their methods and have the approval of the highest authority. And again, as Ronald Reagan said, it is perfectly American to do this. Now, they cite a March 1983 Soldier of Fortune, a full-page advertisement with manuals and cassettes for studies in sniping and advanced by the Special Training School and Technical Seminar. The seminar was especially created for the exclusive use of the Special Training School by former Chief Instructor of Special Forces Sniper School at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. So they come from North Carolina, as I say, to the training camps to teach them how to do it. So the Army is really training an illegal branch of the Army that we're calling private mercenaries, but are being trained to kill because the Special Forces haven't been ordered to go to this place or that place. It continues, this seminar is organized as a training guide for the sniper instructor on how to kill. It covers operational distinctions, sniper selection, how you decide who to kill, the use of unconventional warfare. Unconventional warfare is not shooting, you shoot and he shoots back. It's using wires and tapes and garroting and hanging and everything from a blade or a toothpick, I suppose. Ways to kill is the art of unconventional warfare. They teach ambushes and hiding and observation. In addition to mercenary magazines, are a larger variety of survivalist and weapon magazines. Now, this is an interesting combination, again, that goes into the CIA to military coups, and the publications are not separate from those agents of the current Defense Department, like the Special Forces and so forth, and the higher-ups in the Defense Department. But through the magazines, it's their means of getting what Congress doesn't ask for and can't get, and what the Defense Department isn't allowed to do. It can be done by putting these magazines into operation and getting the people you need and the trainers you need to do what isn't supposed to be done. And this again goes back to what I was saying 2 weeks ago of the way the Constitution was usurped, the intention of this country, putting your money, your CIA, your taxes, or your debt into the hands of these people to literally do what they want. And a study, as I say, has been made by some people into these magazines, and they broke them down. There are three categories: the mercenary, the soldiers, and they overlap the substance in them, the survivalist, and the weapons. And the Eagle office, one of those papers, is called the Eagle, the typical survivalist, and it's published, and they also publish street survival weapons, another group, and combat weapons. They talk about the combat weapons and the street survival. The Eagle office is run by David Atlee Phillips. Atlee Phillips was in charge of the CIA down in South America, in Chile, at the time that Salvador Allende was killed, and Orlando Letelier. He currently has a lawsuit against Don Freed that has been pending for years. He's been active with the death squads in South America and also worked closely with Vernon Walters, our new ambassador to the United Nations, a Knight of Malta, and Michael Townley and George Bush from Task Force 157 with Edwin Wilson. David Atlee Phillips' career covers the task force that Henry Kissinger was the head of with Robert Keith Gray. So a man active with the Eagle magazine and with combat handguns and street survival weapons came directly from the intelligence community, and he was angry at the way it was cut off at the time of the Watergate exposure, so he goes into these magazines. Now that's David Atlee Phillips. The other magazine, Soldier of Fortune, another one, as I've mentioned before, by Robert Keith Brown, and I wrote about him. I repeat in the Rebel magazine of his links to the Aryan nations and identity and the Christian organizations that worked with the assassins of John Kennedy. Robert Keith Brown worked in Southeast Asia with these men. I'll go to his career in a little while. He has two magazines, Soldier of Fortune, again put up by John Singlaub, and Survive. He's the publisher and editor of Soldier of Fortune and Survive. a man on the staff of Survive, his name is Gerald Purnell, Pournelle, is the technology editor for Survive, but he also writes for Soldiers of Fortune. They interchange because they're owned by the same person, and the material is similar but carries a little bit of difference of shade. But basically it's how great I was when I killed these people, and how am I going to kill those people, and how can you learn to kill and defend yourself and go on to aggressive anti-communist stance, which involves these kinds of weapons and techniques for wiping out citizens in their country who, for whatever reason, poverty or a lot of reasons, are gauged even from age 12 years and up as communists and therefore are wiped out. Now, this magazine survived in May-June 1983. Besides the article by Jerry Purnell, the same issue had an article by John Singlaub. Of course, he said, this is also convenient. He has the magazine that he sets up. He can use it as a forum for writing and propaganda purposes. He can attack Senator Edward Kennedy if he opposes military programs, or any senator who does. And by his writing it in these magazines, the paramilitary know who are their friends and who are not, defined by the likes of Singlaub or David Atlee Phillips attacking various politicians or officials, which practically marks them for something that could happen to them, because we're talking about this kind of guerrilla activity that is moving into the United States. Now, David Atlee Phillips was one of the most important intelligence links from the CIA and the Defense Department to the mercenary magazines, because he was so high up in the intelligence, the former head of Western Hemisphere operations for the entire CIA. So he takes over after he leaves there, and he sets up an organization for retired intelligence people, a far-right group, and until December of 1983, he was a contributing editor of articles for Eagle magazine, the mercenary magazine, and he also writes for Robert Brown of Soldier of Fortune. So the former head of the Western Hemisphere for operations of the Central Intelligence Agency is working with the private mercenary magazines, with the advertisements of killing and the Waffen-SS, something that is so grisly and foreign to the United States that is becoming so apple pie that people accept it very quietly instead of being outraged. It'd be similar to the Klan hanging the blacks in the era that they were doing this, and then having books and stories with pictures of them and disseminating them and telling you how to further kill more people, and here are the weapons, and here are the ropes, and here's where you buy the maps, and here's the houses of where these people are. What we've moved to is something, we had a bad situation before that is getting worse, and as the Nazi element took over and instructed these people in the ways of torture and killing, and including the British Empire and William Stevenson of the OSS. If you've seen any of these movies recently on India and the British Empire, they weren't very nice, the torture and the things that went on in order to maintain the empire. But this country, I believe, is getting totally out of control. You can call it freedom of the press, but when the press is the intelligence community and your own Defense Department and the people at home, the liberals, the freethinkers, the labor movement, the Jews, the blacks, the Chicanos, the various races that would be wiped out, when these people have written books and say, this is what I want to do, I want to kill and I want to wipe you out, and then meet with the people who say, here's how you can kill, and here's how you get money to do the killing, we'll give you the money, and here's where you get uniforms, and here's where you can listen to Adolf Hitler, and here's the location for identifying who is connected to the good guys and the bad guys, and tap into computers. That no longer is freedom of speech. That is arranging a revolution in this country, chaos at the least, and a takeover is what their goal is. And as I say, Major Singlaub is the spiritual grandfather of the Soldier of Fortune, publishes along with David Atlee Phillips and along with him, and the Soldier of Fortune runs continuously the ads for the Waffen-SS, and that's very important because in their privacy they dress up, and the American Nazis in this country dress up with the uniforms and give the hand salute and practice what was done in Germany, and for no reason. This country had no reason to go that way. We're getting unemployment, and so far there isn't a big depression, but there is absolutely no reason for the United States to become armed every 20 miles. The goal at the Minutemen, it should have been stopped there. For the stockpiling of weapons, for selling weapons, for the instructions that Colonel William Gale, who became a reverend, has for how to garrote and how to kill, or William Pierce's book, The Turner Diary. That is not literature or freedom of press, and I really think that to end the chaos in this country that is going to happen, and I don't think it's possible that people are intelligent enough to want it to not happen. They don't even know it's happening, that people actually are buying constantly the Nazi regalia and have the German flags and listen and march to these German records and cassettes. Now, Zbigniew wrote for Eagle magazine in February in 1984 when he was deputy of the CIA station chief in Korea under Colonel Vandervert during the Korean War. He said during the Vietnam War, he was commander of MAC-VSOG, the Military Assistance Command Vietnam Studies and Operation Group. He describes this in February of 84 about his operations in Vietnam. He said the purpose was to run unconventional covert operations in Cambodia, Laos, possibly China, in addition to Vietnam operations, which apparently included the Phoenix operation. He's not ashamed of it. He writes for Eagle, the other magazine closely associated with him. Now, it was William Donovan of the OSS who set up the special covert unconventional warfare. The OSS becomes the CIA. The branch is set up with Great Britain, and World Commerce Corporation becomes the organization for Permindex and the assassination teams, and also for rebuilding the German munition cartels. That was the express goal. In the book Operation Sunrise, it tells about Heinrich Himmler and SS Karl Wolff working with the OSS with Allen Dulles and William Donovan. And, of course, Allen Dulles ends up on the Warren Commission when the very people that I'm mentioning are linked directly to the murder of John Kennedy, the incestuous relationship of John McCloy releasing the Nazis to set up the special forces in North Carolina and being on the Warren Commission. The killing of Kennedy and the covering up of it are not separated from these groups who, according to these researchers, are afraid, have worked in the domestic area, and who I believe are responsible for the past assassinations and, of course, for whatever they want to do in the future because they are not identified enough. This one report quotes again Eagle interview with John Zbigniew in February 84, where David Atlee Phillips was contributing that the SOG study in Vietnam was for studies and observation originally. Their cover was that they were doing research and analyzing lessons learned of this war for all the services. That was their operation. It was supposed to be research. But he says, I learned then that SOG, the Special Operation Group, was initially planned to stand for Special Operations Group. And SOG's mission was to conduct covert and clandestine operations in Southeast Asia to enhance the ability for the, in quotes, free world military forces to carry out their mission and at the same time reduce the effectiveness of the communists in Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. They weren't very successful at any of that in spite of all the blood that spilled. And again, wouldn't you think that there would be some new team brought in if the old ways don't work? How much can you spill and ruin before you go to another continent and do the same thing? The funds are endless, and as I cited before, a problem with the CIA organization was that there was no provision for proper briefing on the members of Congress who vote the allocations for the money for this activity. This report says it was nearly a classic joint unconventional warfare task force. This is Zbigniew, again quoting him, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine personnel, officers, enlisted people in the Special Operations Group. It had civilian personnel from the United States side, from the Central Intelligence Agency, and from the United States Intelligence, USIA, the United States Information Agency. It would have been a combined unconventional warfare task force because the greater percent of the forces assigned to us were Vietnamese and non-United States. what Singlaub was saying in his magazine of February 84 was how the Joint Unconventional Warfare Task Force included all members of the armed forces, and later in a few weeks I want to go into Ronald Reagan's escalating the combination only overtly, now covertly, of the SEALs, the Rangers, the Special Forces for operations which were tested in Grenada. They overthrew that little island we could have gotten along with Maurice Bishop to test those operations and to use the combined forces that began to merge in Vietnam. I have to take a 1-minute break now because this tape is about to run out, and I'll be back with you with some more on the survivalist gun-ho magazines and their role with the intelligence community. This is Mae Brussell, and it's side 2 of broadcast number 695, April the 1st, 1988. I realize with a lot of events swirling around, and the news is very interesting, a lot of the current news, it's hard to stay on one subject for some of you, maybe just for 3 weeks, and I will update some of the most important items of the news next week and run through those with you that refer to past broadcasts. But I sometimes isolate subjects for new listeners who are not familiar with this technique. After the Jonestown massacres, I will take maybe 3 broadcasts and just do Jonestown, or on Alternative 3, the plan for space stations and genocide, or on the John Kennedy assassination at the time of the House Select Committee on Assassinations, or the changing of popes, the murder of John Paul I, and the Polish pope that came in, I call him the Auschwitz pope, John Paul II, or the Grenada invasion and the use of our forces, these combined forces, special forces, introducing the Nazi helmets as part of the American uniform now. You don't have to order Nazi helmets from Soldier of Fortune. You can just join the army and you'll be wearing one. Nobody, again, whispered or said a word about that. But sometimes I do take 2 or 3 weeks to set a background, because when I refer to these things and items in the news, and you'll be hearing more and more about them, you can go back to these 3 broadcasts. I hope you're taping off the air every week, and you can order the sheets that accompany these broadcasts by sending a self-addressed stamped envelope, and if you want, you can send some money for the copying of printing them. I'd appreciate that. But I do think it's important, and I'm going slowly for me, because some of these names are new. Mr. General Aderholt, you know Lansdale, you should, General Lansdale from Southeast Asia. Major General John Singlaub has not been that visible in the news, considering his importance, and the organizations are certainly not that visible or not connected to each other. And as the domestic violence increases with the Nazi Party and the Klan and the domestic unrest that's coming, they're directly linked to General John Singlaub and to Robert Keith Brown and to the World Commerce Corporation, or Clay Shaw and Permindex, and the OSS, Mr. William Donovan, and the organizations he set up that became the CIA. What you read in your newspapers today and tomorrow goes back, and will again pick up these items that I'm sharing with you and that other researchers have done and are sharing with us, so that I can refer to them when it's pertinent or important, and you have a more solid background than if I go quickly over a couple of the articles, which I tried to do and had to repeat them because it doesn't make sense to hurry through them when they're so important. Now, to get back to this particular study that was done on the basis that these people are working in the United States and are very dangerous, I just want to mention a few things again about John Singlaub and the magazines. This study that was prepared and given to me says the Soldier of Fortune editor and publisher Robert Keith Brown has on his staff there a man named John Donovan, and his name is very important for articles that come out later for his role in El Salvador and Central America. He's not only the explosive demolitions contributing editor to the Soldier of Fortune, but he's a real activist in uniform fighting when it suits him. And the Soldier of Fortune has a large staff. If you buy it, you'll see it. In quotes, the unconventional operations contributing editor is Major General Heine Aderholt. the same fellow that was meeting in the Pentagon with Mr. Lansdale and John Singlaub. Mr. Aderholt is a part of the board of Soldier of Fortune. While he is very active with the intelligence community, was in the CIA, has his medical relief, flies down to these various areas, and has connecting links to Central and South America that are very important to study. And all of them are associated together with the present, and in the past, they worked with the Special Operations Group, the Phoenix Program, in Southeast Asia. John Donovan and Major General Heine Aderholt of Soldier of Fortune, as I say, worked in the covert and clandestine operations. So they come home from the Phoenix Program and get on the staff of a magazine that hires the soldiers that worked for them in the Phoenix Program under the Central Intelligence Agency, and William Colby, who becomes the CIA director of the intelligence community when the war is over in Vietnam. And then they hire the people that they had before to go out and spread the sabotage and the killing in the name of fighting communism and really protecting the land for a few landlords and the profits of the few, with no intention. They have given no intention in any country of helping the middle class. There isn't any record of anywhere they've gone or touched on the planet Earth that they have tried to improve the lot of the people, and that was the purpose of their being there. They have never overthrown a cruel dictator. They put the cruel dictators in. And this is important to know that Ronald Reagan and George Bush, Bush's brother, is helping and working with these groups, and George Bush was the head of Task Force 157 when we had a double domestic assassination in this country by these people, known as the Orlando Letelier murder that I've referred to many times, with Ronnie Moffat in Washington, D.C. So there are domestic murders carried on by these people identical to what Taiwan is doing when they killed Mr. Liu up in San Francisco, the publisher. There's no difference if Taiwan orders the murder of a man in the United States, an American citizen, critical of Chiang Kai-shek or his son. There's no difference between that and our own American intelligence funding people like Michael Townley and the CIA and the Special Forces to murder somebody in the United States who is criticizing Mr. Pinochet in Chile. The American government has the same hit teams, the same death squads, and I wanted to make that really clear. We are doing exactly what Taiwan or any other country is doing, or Vietnam. We bring over Premier Key and Thu, and they can arrange the murder of Mr. Kuberman the professor down in Los Angeles. This is not a question of foreign operation coming into the United States and killing an American citizen alone. We can get very outraged at that. It is also a matter of Americans killing people in the United States and working with the same teams that allow the murders throughout the world. And the closest organization and common denominator of all of them is the World Anti-Communist League. Now, the Survive magazine and the Soldier of Fortune also work with, besides Mr. John Donovan and Mr. Aderholt, Singlaub, Donovan, and Aderholt, and Robert Brown from the Phoenix Program, another element comes in that they work closely with, and that is the late Lieutenant General Mitchell Werbel. He was sort of the granddaddy, the czarist, the white Russian, the fellow who perfected and devised the silencer that could do so many shots per minute and that you can't hear in the same room. He died in December of 1983 and ran paramilitary training camps in Georgia and advertised extensively in the Eagle magazine run by Mr. David Atlee Phillips of the Central Intelligence Agency. He ran this ad in August of 83 for Psionic Center. That's his training center. 10-day course, .45 caliber combat shooting, executive protection, hostage negotiations, evasive driving, counterintelligence, unconventional weapons, shotgun stress, hand-to-hand combat, risk analysis, and escape and survival. And he has a whole training course that he conducted for years, running ads in David Atlee Phillips magazine, and also very closely associated with Larry McDonald of Western Goals and the various intelligence operations in the Defense Department, I can do a whole program, and I have done many on Mitchell Werbel. Now, incidentally, in November of 83, October and November of 83, when I first got introduced to Larry Flynt and was doing a story on the Korean airline and then on the murder of John Kennedy, in those two articles, I wrote about John Singlaub and Western Goals in his role to the police department in Los Angeles, and how I believe that Larry McDonald had to be killed to protect the members of Western Goals who were so influential. And within a short time, Mitchell Werbel, with all these expertise skills, moved into the home of Larry Flynt. I never did get the chronological order of these characters, but along with Werbel was Gordon Novell and G. Gordon Liddy, and I was writing about the murder of John Kennedy and referred to Reverend Gale and Robert Keith Brown and Brown's superior John Singlaub. One article about Brown was in the JFK assassination, the Nazi connections, and John Singlaub was in the article I was doing on the Korean airline. And they were closely affiliated. So I was writing about all of these characters and the silencers of Werbel and so forth when they moved right into the house. And, of course, the rest is history of what happened to Larry Flynt. And if you don't know that, in March 1983, in the Soldier of Fortune magazine, they had another ad of the Cobray School of Mitchell Werbel, where it advertises that the security staff of Lyndon LaRoche from the National Caucus of Labor Committee was trained and attended a party with Mitchell Werbel and received their weapons training with Mitchell Werbel Psionics Training Center. This affects the Larry Flynt operation. What happened when Rebel magazine got started? Somebody at Rebel, I don't want to mention on the air, hired Lyndon LaRoche to do the security to check in who was writing for the magazine and what their background was. And I might have mentioned this before, but it was the LaRoche organization that was checking the security, and they turned in a report that somebody saw on this man's desk that said Mae Brussell is affiliated with the KGB, that she's a security risk. Now, I was writing about John Singlaub, and the LaRoche organization that works with Singlaub can get even by turning in a report that goes into a computer throughout the United States. So if I call a congressman's office or a newscaster and want to give them information, they ask who is talking, and if you call back, they say, we're doing a security check. This happened and twice in the last several weeks. So they do a security check, and how do I know that it isn't going right back into the material fed by LaRoche, who does the security material and protects John Singlaub by saying that the people who talk about him and expose his activity therefore have to be KGB. The LaRoche people trained and worked with the Soldier Fortune Group and Mitchell Werbel, and so that they can look out for the interests of those people by getting even with those multinational computers to make sure that you don't have opportunities to publish or speak at public or maybe teach at universities if I wanted to do it again. All these kinds of clearances are gone. The opportunities for even probably getting a major publication are out, because into the computers goes the story of your political affiliations, and the basis for doing that isn't who you see or know or what you're doing, but because you're using the right to question the things that they're doing to overthrow this government. Now, September 27th, 1979, on ABC, Geraldo Rivera had an interview with Mitchell Werbel, where he proudly called himself the war lover. They described him as a lifelong soldier, a freelance secret agent. Again, the freelance business acts as if he's out on his own when he has the approval to do anything and does work with the federal government all along. But it makes it kosher to say he's freelance because it doesn't look like we're at war or we're killing anybody. It's just Mitchell Werbel that's overthrowing the country. And the program describes his Cobray School, how he teaches how to kill. The weapons range from hatchets to machine guns. He's a half-hour drive from Atlanta, Georgia, and he's devoted to mastering the violent skills of death and destruction. This is a description of him on ABC television. Students are taught individual warfare. They learn to kill with pistols and rifles by daylight or night. The teaching program is used by local law enforcement people, bodyguards, and so forth, and Werbel is that chief of security. Burt Walden, a man who teaches among the group, is considered the most effective killer in the United States. This was on the program. Burt Walden is director of marksmanship, accredited with killing more than any soldier in U.S. military history, 113 enemy dead in Vietnam. Wouldn't you want to know if they were really enemy of who, or if they were simply villagers that he went through, women and children? What is the state of mind of a person in uniform? But he brags that he's killed more than anyone in Vietnam, and he teaches the shooting for Mitchell Werbel. Barney Cochran is the director of unconventional weapon instruction. He's a retired Air Force colonel, worked with the Air Commandos in Vietnam. He has a legend in the shadowy world of secret warriors. He presents specialties like killing with hatchets or ordinary kitchen knives. Mitchell Werbel does more than run a military school. This is part of ABC program, September 27, 1979. He has high connections to big business, which again is the link to World Commerce Corporation and those kind of activities. He has connections to the intelligence community and connections to the highest level, the covert, clandestine, and to Daniel Graham, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and he's close to people they want on, like General John Singlaub. So Mitchell Werbel, and we know he is close to Singlaub, it works closely with Soldier of Fortune, and Singlaub sets that up, and Singlaub can link to the police departments through computers of Western goals with people like Admiral Moore on the staff, and Roy Cohn. Again, I say I'll run through the names for you. Edward Teller, the father of the hydrogen bomb, the who's who of warfare and future wars that could be horrendous. Singlaub linking to the World Anti-Communist League and the American Security Council, those four branches that I've been covering, and very closely tied to Werbel, who is a private CIA for hire. They said Major General John Singlaub knew Mitchell Werbel as a private CIA for hire, a private individual who can mount the kinds of secret operations the CIA wants done, but unofficially. So here we have, again, over and over, in these articles and descriptions that I have isolated and saved for you, or the accumulated work of some other researchers pointing out this broadcast that I taped a long time ago but haven't pulled out, the kind of mentality of these people starting before World War II, before we entered it, with British intelligence, and when J. Edgar Hoover was working with Interpol, when it was a police operation with Mr. Kaltenbrunner and Heydrich, top Nazis, one hung, one shot, and was a police setup for international police under Adolf Hitler. He carried pictures of the Gestapo in his office until Pearl Harbor, and then J. Edgar Hoover took them off the wall. But starting in 1942-43, he was ready to be kindly to them, but underneath and overtly we were fighting the war. It looked like that, and we did fight it, but while it was going on, we were making arrangements for the marriage of these people to our own agencies and the corporations that were again to build up the German cartels. So the links of these people can branch off. They play many roles. They can put on a uniform and be in the Defense Department. They can be on assignment for the CIA. They can do killing and overthrowing when the CIA isn't allowed to do it. So they go out, in quotes, unofficially. So the covert operation even has brakes on it. And when the covert operation or the heads of the department say, you can't do that, even though Congress doesn't know half of what they're doing, then they send the likes of Mitchell Werbel, and even though he's deceased, there's 1,000 of him, and there's enough books on how to do the things that he did, and the organization set up publications so that you have a guideline of everything that they've been taught, and they update it with the latest techniques. Now, there's a quotation by John Singlaub referring to Mitchell Werbel. He said, Mitchell is an expert of clandestine operations. He's an expert on weapons, particularly on special types of weapons, silencers, and so forth. And, of course, their book runs ads and publications on how to buy these silencers. He has the respect of a lot of the Special Forces people. Those are the Green Berets from North Carolina, Jesse Helms' hometown. They have worked with him, and they know he has a lot of connections. If someone wants to bring something together, some mercenaries, to help a government someplace, to try to get this through the Congress and to try to get this through with the approval of the American people would be almost impossible. So having someone who knows how to get things done, you could contact him and have a mercenary force together rapidly and go to a certain area and do certain things. This is the way Che Guevara was killed down in Bolivia, and a lot of other heads of states and labor leaders and newspaper publishers and doctors and scientists and witnesses to events, whether it was the Abraham Lincoln Brigade or the Battle of the Bulge. These death squads have been in operation, and these people are glorified by the milieu that they work with. There's adoration in what they do, and they emulate them. And the so-called left or the middle have no idea this is going on. They listen to a program like that and turn on to the next commercial and have a beer or switch to the ball games. But when you read it, it again tells you, and I've cited in the last 3 weeks, maybe 7 or 8, 10 times of references of bypassing the United States. Now that is what happened, and this is what is happening. And again, if they have the means to buy radio stations, television stations, to get people fired, the money is unlimited to go in and pick up motion picture studios, anything you want. In conclusion of the Geraldo Rivera broadcast, he said, Werbel is not merely a mercenary commander with a homicidal hatred of communists, but he's a committed racist as well. Werbel was asked what motivated him to work in paramilitary operations from Argentina, Guatemala, Thailand, Vietnam, Dominican Republic, and now running training groups in Georgia. And he responded, the real reason is to keep America American, to keep the goddamn communists out of here, maybe I shouldn't say that on the air, to keep the communists out of here, to keep the GD socialists out of here, to keep any group, any ethnic group, with the exception of my own, from running the country. And that is precisely what William Pierce writes about in the Turner Diaries, that Reverend Gale has and works with Robert Keith Brown and Edgar Eugene Bradley and the assassination team that set up the murders of the Kennedy brothers and Martin Luther King, and also sets up the religious right, the Klan, the Nazis, the Posse Comitatus. The goal is not different than Mitchell Werbel. The one thing you can say, and I can't praise enough, is the loyalty of the right wing, all the way from the German Gestapo and the end of World War I to up to the present day. Everything they say or do, they know why they're doing it, and they don't pick hairs and argue about it. If somebody else is trying to expose these situations, I have been at lecture forums or locations in the East, and people would ask me about I.F. Stone. If I don't like I.F. Stone, then nothing I do in the research has had any meaning to them. Some of the potentially most intelligent people will lose your interest and walk away if you distrust I.F. Stone. If they say, what do you think about Mark Lane? And I tell them what I think and his past record and what he has done in his work of concealing the Nazis. If you don't like Mark Lane, there's a group of researchers who get out their various newsletters who have nothing to do with you if you don't like Mark Lane. If you like Jim Garrison and his attempt to try Clay Shaw and to bring Edgar Eugene Bradley and Lauren Hall and these various elements into New Orleans for a trial on the murder, the conspiracy to kill John Kennedy. If you like him, then you're on the outer fringe of some people who say, if you work with Jim Garrison, I can't have anything to do with you. The research continues, and there are many fine researchers, such as the people putting this work together, and many, I don't cite their names on the air because they want privacy. And we have a certain loyalty among us, but the reason the group isn't larger is that these various elements have the flimsiest reason for flaking off. Some of the women's group don't like it if I say Gloria Steinem is linked to the CIA. They pull back and think that, what kind of a feminist is she? You can't talk about Betty Friedan. You can't talk about Gloria Steinem. If the evidence is there or the suspicion is there that they are not using their full knowledge or means or willingness to attack the problems that are taking away our liberty, that talk about meaningless things or are meaningful but not as important as simultaneously working on these issues. If you question why they're dragging their feet or why they close the door when somebody wants to give them evidence, then you become an enemy and these people fringe away. Now, the right wing doesn't do that. I know the whole religious right, the fundamentalist right, all of the military, they don't agree on everything or every person or every organization, but they agree on their end goals and they will stick together in many ways. And so that they have this deep affection when they speak for each other. They don't look at each other as killers, they look at each other as saviors. That same mesmerization that went on in Nazi Germany is in their eyes, and the same indifference is in the population here. And the same links to the federal government is evident here, and the same indifference of the general population is evident here. And that is a sure way to have fascism in America. Now, to complete this segment, and then I have more going into the magazines and the military activity of these people, their bondage to the organizations I have cited and the interrelationship of those people, I just want to summarize a few pages that was presented by the people that link these various organizations, the magazines, the American Security Council, the Western Goals, and the World Anti-Communist League together. In summary, the Western Goals section describes Major John Singlaub, the current head of that group of the World Anti-Communist League, with close ties to the American Security Council, and his role in the Phoenix program in Southeast Asia, his work with the assassination programs in Vietnam and torture, his long association with Nazi interrogators and the Waffen-SS and the uniforms, illustrates the role of John Singlaub in setting up the Soldier of Fortune. The overall umbrella for the Death Squad network for Latin America, I mentioned before, is titled CAL. That is the Latin American Anti-Communist Confederation, and they are the affiliate of the World Anti-Communist League that I cited a while back, funded by a neo-Nazi splinter group after World War II in Mexico, and Mexico was heavily saturated with literally hundreds and even thousands of Nazis that settled in Mexico. And they have this group, CAL, are the initials set up by the Nazis in Mexico, and CAL was also called the White Hand, the White Force, the White Brigade. You might have heard them. And at a meeting in 1981, the secretary of the organization, CAL, Rafael Rodriguez, concluded his speech to members, all member organizations of CAL in El Salvador and the liberation movement in Guatemala are on the front line. And this expose says in Guatemala, the National Liberation Movement is headed by Mario Sandoval Alcaran, and I mentioned before his role with the Party of Organized Violence. So, in concluding this section on the World Anti-Communist League, I want to mention that one former top official of the World Anti-Communist League described in May 28, 1978, in the Washington Post, there's an article by Paul Valentine. He described a situation where he confided to an associate during a drinking bout that he had personally hidden Dr. Joseph Mengele on his exodus to Paraguay. This is somebody who accompanied him to Paraguay and is a member of the World Anti-Communist League. I don't know whether he did or not, but this is a copy or a statement of a report that he made. And this group are as I say, the real Nazis working closely with the organizations. And I will probably update the news for you next week and get back in weeks to come on some more material. I have a lot more material on them, and as I say, I could have done it faster, but on the other hand, I don't see how I could, because I do want you to think about these names when I refer to them again. They're new names to learn in organizations, but they're very important. Incidentally, I do have time to talk about the American Security Council. I'll go into greater detail of those members and the Coalition for Peace Through Strength that I briefly mentioned before. In describing these particular researchers summarized by saying the American Security Council and the Coalition for Peace Through Strength are two of the most heavily financed right-wing lobbying organizations in the nation. Based in Washington, they share offices and interlocking personnel with the Security and Intelligence Fund, Their activities include speaker bureaus, intensive lobbying for Congress, purchasing of newspaper and television space to put forward extreme military and foreign policy decisions. The American Security Council and the Coalition for Peace Through Strength are supervised by General Robert Richardson III and John Fisher, both long-standing collaborators with the neo-Nazi racialist and recent head of the American branch of the World Anti-Communist League, Roger Pearson. And it's long overdue that I do some broadcast for you on Roger Pearson. And this group also links to General Daniel Graham and Fritz Kramer in Washington, D.C., but I don't have time to go into that. Their organization, the Institute on Strategic Trade, they directly link to them. And, of course, this Fritz Kramer is the fellow that I consider the number one man to smoke out and to be seen visibly and fingerprinted as the guy in the United States Army Plans Department running these particular groups that I've talked about at length, and particularly for the last 3 weeks. I'm convinced, because of the role of Alexander Haig and Henry Kissinger in South Korea, Vietnam, and the Defense Department, and Reverend Moon's activities, and John Sing Laub, and Mr. Aderholt, and Mr. General Lansdowne, all of them. It goes back to the Kissinger-Kramer connections, and I can't help but feel that Mr. Fritz Kramer should come forward now and be identified. But not this evening. The time has run out, so I have to stop. But this is Mae Brussell. The program is World Watchers, and I'll be back with you next week.